This has just been a wonderful journey. We represented Jill for 11 years, and it's just been a wonderful growth, I think, for Martha and I to learn about you and your paintings and to see this fabulous show. They just keep getting better and better. Like, we don't know what's coming out of you, and we like it. So I'm going to go through and take care of some business because Jill has a wonderful long CV, and I'm going to cut it down for you, but I think it's important to hear some of the exhibitions and a little bit about Jill, and then we'll get into the conversation. So as I think many of you know, Jill uses a technique of pouring acrylic polymers. So I like to say that because a lot of people walk in here and look at these works and think they are encaustic or wax. And it's really important to know that these works are actually acrylic paints. And so Jill will talk more about that. Her paintings are characterized by coloristic inventiveness as overlaying layers of translucency create new hues, exploring what she calls an active life of color. Born in 1955, Jill is a lifelong resident of New York City. She went to the, I'll say famous, LaGuardia School of Music and Art, and went on to study fine art at Bennington College, which is also famous for many reasons, graduating in 1976. She came back to New York City to Hunter College to graduate with an MFA in 1982. She recently was reviewed for this show. Mario Naves reviewed it, and he called Nathanson a veteran abstractionist, which kind of makes me laugh. I think, are we fighting a war here? But anyway, you are a veteran abstractionist, and that her pictures have presence. Jill Nathanson has a CV, as I said, that's so long. I'm just going to give some highlights. She's shown at Tibor Denage, June Kelly, Elizabeth Harris, Ethan Cohen, and Gallery Louise Wirth in Zurich, to name a few. In 2006, Jill was included in the Legacy of Hans Hofmann at the Painting Center, curated by Karen Wilkin. In 2016, she was included in Confronting the Canvas, curated by Jamie DeSimone at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville. In 2020, she was included in selections from the permanent collection at the Columbia Museum in South Carolina. And I will never forget this because your painting was hanging like this with a Monet. And it blew my mind. It was an incredible, the curatorial team is young and amazing, and it was such a daring move, and it worked like really well. She also was included in the permanent collection show Point of Departure, Abstraction 1958 to the Present at the Sheldon Museum in Lincoln, Nebraska. And last year, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston included two of Jill's paintings in Drawn to Color, which was also from their collection, and that one I think you were hanging by Rothko. You know, so just saying, I am your art dealer after all. I get to say these things. In addition to Houston, Columbia Museum, Sheldon, Jacksonville, Jill's work can be found at the Telfair Museum in Savannah, Georgia, and the Philadelphia Museum of Jewish Art, amongst other places. This exhibition is accompanied by a 24-page catalog, which you're welcome to have on the way out. David Rhodes, your fellow painter, did a fabulous essay for us and made some incredible connections. Jill is also, I'm going to say, a beloved teacher of abstraction at the Art Students League, and many of your students are here. They always come to visit. They love you and learn so much from you. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, and yay. Oh, do you need a chair in or not? So I did that part. I feel like we don't talk about it often, so I would love to know about your background. Like, I'd love to know about Benning at the time you were there, and just some early life stories.
Good. Okay, right, there's no mic, so I have to try to be loud. So tell me if I'm not loud enough. So I just wanted to, you were asking about Bennington. There was life before college, as we all know. I went to High School of Music and Art, so I had some aesthetic life before college. And also my brother, who was older, was already in the East Village, kind of theater and music scene. My brother Roy Nathanson's kind of a famous jazz musician, and he was already in some very non-traditional scenes, and I was there with him. So I had a life before going to Bennington, and then, you know, my household was kind of chaotic. I wanted to get out of there. I applied for college a year early and went to Bennington at 17 and was very happy to get away from home. And it was very beautiful in Vermont, and it was very beautiful what was going on in the studios, and it totally blew me away coming to Bennington College, which was kind of a seat of high modernism at that time. There was all of this color field painting going on, and I was just kind of in love with it. I sort of fell in love, and I think I was in love as much with what the senior painters were doing as I was with what I was seeing in the galleries when I would go to New York and go to these fancy shows at Andre Emmerich and whatever. Come to New York and see all the shows of these now, you know, these people who are hardly known, I guess, a lot of them, you know, Kenneth Nolan, Jules Olitsky, Morris Lewis, Stanley Boxer, who's shows here, Jack Bush, the Canadian, who was someone I especially loved. And what I wanted to say is that when I started at Bennington, I almost immediately became very close to a faculty member there, Sophie Healy, who was a drawing teacher, but she was also a color field painter. And she was very close with Kenneth Nolan. And the two of them were involved with the psychology and the ideas of Wilhelm Reich, which were very powerful ideas and had very strong impact on their painting. And I was privy to their conversations from my days as a freshman and onward. Wilhelm Reich is largely forgotten, but he posited that there was a powerful energy, a life energy in all living things and pervasive in the universe. And there was a visual element to, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, it's a big deal, but there was a visual element that immediacy, visual energy was capable of kind of being very present. You could have a very, very direct experience of this energy if you were open to it, if you were really alive. And this was really part of color field painting. It was part of Kenneth Nolan, and there's actually online on the Tate Museum website, there's an essay about it, and I have it, it's called, if you put in Kenneth Nolan, Wilhelm Reich, Tate, it'll come up. It's called something, Fields of Color, or I don't know, I have it someplace in the notes. But you can find it, and it's amazing stuff. And actually, Sophie Healy, who was my teacher, maintains that Morris Lewis was involved with Wilhelm Reich as well. And this stuff was really big. You know, it was very exciting. It was, there was a kind of a grandeur about the whole thing. And this was my understanding of what color field painting was. And it's really quite different than, you know, many of my peers, you know, freshmen, sophomores at Bennington, you know, we're beginning to think, ooh, this color field stuff, it's like, you know, bank lobby art, you know. And I was like, no, how can you think that? So I had a rather different perspective on color field painting than many other people. Anyway, for whatever reasons, I very early on found myself feeling that I was going to be able to paint color field paintings with more complex emotion, more ambiguity, more darker emotions. I thought that I was going to be able to do something with color field painting that I didn't see out there. So the comical thing was that then I would bring all these paintings into class, these huge paintings with all of these weird colors and big value contrast, and I'd say, aha, I have a color field painting with all of this big stuff going on. And they say, well, that's nice, but it's not a color painting. It's, And it went on for years. And then as a junior, I remember I finally painted a very small yellow painting. And my teacher, the critic, Sidney Tillum, who was a wonderful man, I don't know if anybody here remembers, did anyone remember Sidney? Anyway, he was a wonderful critic. And he said, well, yeah, you finally did it. But it had nothing of what it was just a common yellow painting.
Was it heated at Bennington? Like, were there different camps? Because I know Greenberg was there a few years before. Right?
It was mostly I think most people were kind of moving away from the kind of high modernist Greenberg thing. I never met Clement Greenberg when I was at Bennington. He was quite distant from my experience. But anyway, people were really moving away from this, Bennington thing. Yeah, and I really stayed with it. I really thought that it was just beginning and there was more to be done and more to be said.
And so then you come to New York, and what happens to you in New York? So it's Hunter College?
Well, I didn't go to Hunter right away. I was in the East Village, painting just in my studio, feeling very, all of a sudden, not with it. My paintings were really not what people were doing.
What were people doing?
It was kind of a time of minimalism. A lot of people were painting minimalist paintings, and I was interested in a lot of what I was seeing. Early Bryce Martin, in particular, Agnes Martin, were super exciting to me. But I didn't feel that people were that interested in what I was doing, though I met the curator and artist Dan Cameron, who put me in a show at Tibordinage in 1982 called The Broken Surface. And at that time, I was already using a lot of transparent acrylic, so I've been doing this transparent acrylic thing for a really long time. And somebody said to me at that time, I won't mention who said it, it's a time of pluralism. You can do anything you want, except color field painting.
Oh, I want to know who that is. Later.
But I get it. It was a very complicated thing, what happened with color field and Clement Greenberg. I mean, I totally get it. But at that time, it was painful, and it was hard. And so, I was painting in New York. I had my ups and downs. And at a certain point, I did meet people from that kind of color field world through, I was invited to Triangle Workshop, which is a 2-week workshop that the great sculptor Anthony Caro developed. And I went there for 2 weeks, and I met a lot of people. I met the critic Karen Wilkin, who, is Karen here? She's supposed to be here tonight. Anyway, she's not here. And, so I developed a couple of relationships that were important and good. And I had a solo show, thanks to Triangle and Tony Caro in 1984. And that was fantastic, a New York solo show. And, that's 40 years ago now.
Were you making studies at that point? You want to tell us how?
No.
You don't want to tell us?
No. That, at that time, I was painting very directly with a lot of thick, transparent acrylic paint. What I wanted to say was that, during that time, a lot of things happened. This was a kind of a young period for me, and during those years, I lost 2 of the people in my immediate family to suicide. So it was, I was coping with all of that as well. And so it was during that time, I, developed a lot of different ideas about what painting could be for me. But in around 1990, I had a big change in life. And one of the things that happened was that I got involved with Jewish ideas and Jewish practice and Jewish learning. And another one of those things was that I got married. And another one of those things was that during that time, I had been painting with color for a long time, but I wanted color in my paintings to be much more meaningful. I just really wanted to change the way that color was for me. And yeah, so I started doing studies at that point.
Okay.
That was in around 1990. And so the studies that I started doing then were just little, I stopped doing everything with all this fancy acrylic, products and stuff, and just with ordinary paint, just 4 color areas on a small, cheap canvas. And I just wanted them to interact with each other and do a lot with each other and just be very alive with each other and very alive with me. So it became kind of a meditative process of looking at these colors and just really being very demanding of what the color could do and really wanting it to satisfy me and really wanting some emotional response. It had to do something. I guess, I had gotten to a point where it didn't feel like enough in my work. So for at least a year, I was sharing a studio with Anne Delaney, who's here, and that's all I did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I did these studies, and the studies really developed into some better paintings. And after that, I started to have gallery representation, and the work got more dynamic and more personal and just better. So yeah, so that's the story about my studies, which is really, feel like that was really a key moment, and I still work from studies. I really still have that process of having to really, grapple with color so that it's doing something for me.
Were you painting on canvas? Like you were saying,
those were little studies on canvas.
And you were painting on canvas?
I was painting on canvas, yeah.
Because I'm obsessed, as you know, by the fact that you paint on wood panel.
Right.
Because every person that comes in here, I'm constantly, having to explain. People don't understand when they see your paintings. And so I'm always reminded that this surface that you choose is so important to what you're doing. So you want to talk about just your process for basic? I know you don't want to, but I think it's good to just hear the base. I know there's a lot of artists here, but I think it's good to know for others too how, in general, you do this.
Yeah. So, the way that I do my studies now is I don't do them with paint anymore, because I'll get back to sort of how I got into these transparencies that I'm using now. But I print out colors onto plastic sheets from the computer. I just choose a lot of colors and I print them onto like overhead projector sheets like you could buy at Staples. And I have like a big library of plastic sheets that I use for the studies. And I just spend a lot of time doing these collages with these plastic sheets, and again, being very demanding of how the color is going to work, and what kind of sequence, what kind of structure. And I stick to a color field practice, which I had meant to say something about before, of keeping the edges fluid during the time when I'm developing the picture. So, I might crop, I might expand as I'm doing the studies. And then when I finally have the picture and the edges are settled for me, then I'll order a custom panel. And then when I get the panel, I have to seal it, and I have to gesso it, and I have to get the gesso really, really smooth because I'm going to pour on it. And then the main thing is the color. So I have to absolutely match the color of the studies. Like, not a very, romantic thing to do, but I do it. And so I mix up acrylic paints like anybody else.
Not out of the tube, because I have to tell people, not out of a tube.
No. I'm laboriously,
it's mixing colors.
And I really am very rigorous about that. It has to be exact, and it's crazy, I know, because I enjoy getting it right. I really enjoy getting it right, because if that study means something to me, man, I'm gonna get there. So I get the color just with regular, ordinary acrylic paints, and then I have these gallons of custom pouring medium that Golden Artist Colors has made for me. And I then will test a little bit of this pigment in that medium, and I'll test it, see if it's drying to be exactly the same color. So I do some test panels, little test panels, and then when I've got everything right, then I go for it on the big panel, which is not exactly like really going for it like whole hog. It's like I tape off a shape, and then I pour some of the medium on it, and then I, with the color in it, and I pick it up and let it, let gravity pull it down, so I don't touch it. It's really hands off. But the thing is about this, is that enough about how it gets on the
Don't you love that, right?
So, anyway, so each color is done, it's a full day, it takes overnight to dry, and then I can put on the second color.
Because you can't see what color it is until
you can't
it
see
dries.
it, and also
that's what shocks me, that I don't really understand.
It changes
you don't know
a lot
what color
when
it
it's
is.
dry.
Yeah.
You don't know the value. It
Yeah.
changes tonal value a lot. But what was I going to say? Yeah, but so I can manipulate the medium as it's flowing down the board. And so that kind of breathing of the surface is a result of how I manipulate it or how it flows down the board. And the beauty of this custom product is that it does breathe, when it's a little bit thinner, a little bit thicker. So it's a lovely material. So I manipulate it that way. But what was it that I wanted to say? I don't remember, but then there are the overlaps. I'm really careful that the overlaps are going to be exciting color. So that's part of the study process.
I know, it's like you can't even identify, like those overlap colors become something entirely different. You're almost trying to figure out which colors.
And it's like it's like a glazing, it's like an old master, overpainting and glazing kind of technique that comes through these overlaps. But at the same time, they're very flat. They're the paintings that are developed to be, moving across the picture. Yeah. Yeah.
So you talked about how specific you want to get each color, but if you're pouring, but do you try to get the shape as specific as your study, or do you?
I do.
How do you do that? Because the pour, it says a lot.
Oh, and they're taped off. It's taped.
So
it's completely taped, and I cut into the tape.
Oh.
I cut into the tape, and the thing is about these shapes, if you really look at them, there's a lot of convex and concave. I really cut into them so that they're kind of, there's some activity on the surface of how these shapes are moving across. So I used to just measure them, and it was just mind-bogglingly boring. It was just, so now I project the drawing. And so, and then that's pretty much what I do.
So that's an interesting technique, because we usually think of pour as being very loose and undefined, and yet you've got the tape there, which people have a whole history about tape. So you have two things that really contrast each other.
Yeah.
And that's kind of very exciting in a way, those two very contrasting.
Yeah, yeah. But, in a way, for me, the flow that you get in the paintings is really about the color. It's really what was settled with the study. And in a way, the materials augment it. They elaborate it. But it's really something that is set up in the color originally.
And
but
then
let me just answer.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, Randy.
Do you just work on one board at a time?
Yeah, pretty much. I pretty much work on one painting at a time. I mean, I might be finishing up something else, like the last bits of something, but there's a flow.
And how strong are you? I mean, these panels are very heavy. It takes two people to move them around here, so that's really incredible.
I had an assistant for some of the last paintings. Yeah.
What size are your drawings?
They're little. They're pretty little.
4x6?
Well, for one thing, as I said, the edges change. So I might start it out like, 4x10 or something, and then it may end up 4x6 or something. Yeah, I kind of crop it and
we
yeah.
talked about that cropping in some ways. You want to talk about how you crop your paintings?
Yeah, so you know, the fluidity about what's going to be is really just a lot of it happens just in the studies, because I can't crop these. You know, I'd need a big saw and it would be just a big mess. So I can't crop a panel. So a lot of the fluidity happens. And I think what Christine wanted me to talk about is that I said in another talk that I love that Amy Silman thing where she shows like that she's done 36 paintings underneath one painting, that she's repainted and repainted. And I can't do that because everything is transparent. I can't really paint over anything. And the surface really has to be really kind of a virgin surface. So all the overpainting really goes through my pulling apart studies, throwing them back together, taking part of one, putting it to another, you know. Kim, yeah?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because I know you go back sometimes and painted areas of color after your course is dry.
You mean with the oil paint?
Yes.
Yeah.
So like, let's say along the right edge of
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about what guides your thinking on that?
Yeah. You know, some of them have oil painting and some of them don't. I used to use more oil painting than I do now. That one has, and that one over there has. And it's sometimes that it needs a little pushback. You know, it needs a little pushback. Sometimes it needs a little bit more small scale incident. And sometimes it needs just like a pressure. I think a lot of what's important here for me is that I came from this kind of painting where everything is very expansive and it's kind of glowing and it's kind of expansive. But ultimately, I think you need something else. You know, I kind of feel like I've introduced a lot of pressure into this kind of painting. The pressure of things like on top of each other, or the pressure of something coming in at the edge and going like that. And I think the oil paint is a pressure point. I feel like that's like a way that I can kind of just hold that surface down if it's starting to just kind of ooze too much or flow too much. And so it's kind of I feel like the overlaps are a kind of pressure. There's kind of a pressure of space, like that yellow. I really love that part. That yellow the yellow's coming forward, and then those overlaps are kind of squashing it back down. So there's a lot of, I feel like I've introduced ways to kind of work against some of that part of color field painting that is great, but like Helen Frankenthaler, I just can't look at too much Helen Frankenthaler. I just can't, it's too expansive. So I kind of feel like there's a lot of reacting against color field, even though it's kind of the same language. Kind of how I feel about it. I don't know if that's true or not.
I feel like
each genre form develops new things. So you could say, what is color field 50 years old? So you can say, well, I'm not going to be 50 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm going to change it.
Yeah.
And you're doing that. I don't know anybody that paints like you at all. I mean, we're all going around town. You have a very unique style, a very unique technique. And Christina Keys said something in your last show. She talked about how your paintings are sort of deceptive because, you walk in and you say, oh, aren't these beautiful? But as you get closer, you see that they're resolved, but there's an unresolved, like that oil paint. Coming back to that, what you're saying is you're sort of coming in and out of these paintings, yet when you get up close and you see that oil paint, it sort of stops you. You're like, oh yes, this is a painting. We are not underwater, we're not in the sky, or wherever you are with it.
And very material.
And I think the wave, like that sort of wavy quality is the same. I'm admire, and I really don't think there's anyone doing what you do.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and one thing I want to say also is that this material is kind of on the surface. It's not in the surface the way that a lot of the color field painting was, and I think that makes a difference. But,
is that part of the panel too?
I think it's part of the panel. Yeah,
using the panel.
So absorbent.
Did you use? You were canvas and then switched? Was it like a deliberate?
These paintings I can't do on canvas. I tried to do them on canvas, and it just didn't it didn't flow right. It just didn't work.
Yep.
Yeah. Jude. Yeah.
You mentioned the concave and the convex and the various, wave-like structures. These forms, is this something that you've always been attracted to, or can you just talk about the forms?
They've gotten more curvy over the years. A couple of shows ago, they were kind of some curve, but a lot more sort of quasi-straight. And I think that I've come to feel that that there's differences in how colors meet, or when there is a curve, or if it's a straight line. And I'm kind of really interested in those differences, and just the way that the curves move against the edge of the picture. And there's a processional quality that they move a lot, and I think a lot about music and kind of sequence of chords and sequence of notes, and so I want them to, it's about how they move, and I think that I don't, I kind of think about of color activity, like the active life of color in a painting. And it's, color, not just, color against color next door to each other, but, what's going on across the painting? How does the color, move across the painting? And what are those movements like in terms of the drawing, as well as the reaching of colors towards each other within this limited field? I think of the painting as a limited field of vision.
I hope this is sort of jumping back to the very beginning. I was fascinated when you said that you were interested in the ideas of Reich, because I have read Reich. All that fascinating stuff about orgone energies, and it made me think of something, and that is that not sort of the emotional and energetic possibilities of color. And I wondered if you had read Annie Besant and Ledbetter's thought forms.
No, I've never heard of it.
Oh my God! It was a book that was done by Annie Besant of the Theosophical Society. It was influenced Kandinsky, and Mondrian. A lot of people were very, very influenced by it. Annie Besant and Ledbetter, actually, the terms were channeled, and they did it. You can Google thought forms Annie Besant, and you can download it now. It's a 15-page book you can download on the internet.
Wow.
They worked through channeling and did a whole book of color through sort of the emotion and relating color to emotions. Another person who did that, of course, A.B. and I were talking about
Goethe.
in terms of Goethe's
Yeah.
I said, why aren't we talking about Goethe's color theory? The last time we talked about Goethe's color theory for 45 minutes, and she said, no Goethe tonight. I said, what? I had to go through all this?
And
Yeah.
Because Rudolf Steiner at the Goetheanum spent like 4 years doing a translation of Goethe's color theory. And so also Steiner did a lot of work that relates to, he was also interested in the thought forms of Besant and Ledbetter, but he also did a lot of things on color transparencies, relating color to spiritual states, and that's kind of dimensionality. And so I was just sort of riffing on that, because you were talking about returning to Judaism, you were talking about these sort of energetic possibilities, and I wondered if you had sort of dipped into that.
I'm not that familiar with that bunch of writers, so I'll write it all down later, or maybe we'll have it taped, so I'll get it all. But there is, I don't know if I really want to go into this one, but there's also something that I've been very fascinated by, was that in the 18th century, Kabbalists would associate the attributes of God with specific colors, the sephirot, and meditate on unifying their awareness through unifying colors. But there was never anything material, it was just completely mental. So that's one of the related things that I'm very interesting.
But I think
very
people get
interesting.
that. I know
Yeah,
I certainly do. When I look at these, they're meditative, and I think people get that sense, and people gravitate towards different colors and different paintings. And I know you're doing something to us here.
Well, I come out of this with a lot of homework.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah, no, it sounds great.
Clint spent 4 years in the Jersey audience studying
Yeah.
Curtis color.
Interesting,
Yeah, I think the Ledbetter, I think going tonight, it's going to blow your mind.
Great.
Jill, will you
Yeah.
talk about one more thing about composition? So
Yeah.
talk about fluid bridge, because I think we were talking about form here, and that is a different form, that painting.
Yeah. Well, that's that painting.
Yes.
Would it be okay if I talked about this one
Yes,
first?
you talk about whatever you want.
So I just to talk about a specific painting. This painting is called Part Song, and it's one I especially like. It's really it's 4 colors, but mainly this lavender, the yellow, and the orange. And I just kind of wanted to talk about how it seems to work for me, which is that the orange is actually very unsaturated. It's not very strong at all. It's very vulnerable to being changed by other colors. Now, a lot of painters are here and they know how much colors are changed by what they're next to. If you're not a painter and you've ever painted a wall and then you try to touch it up and you see how incredibly crazy things get, like very quickly. Colors change each other by what's next to them. So to me, part of the way that that's working is that the lavender, the blue in the lavender, is making the orange maybe a little bit more orange, even though it's quite weak. But the yellow that's sticking on top of it is pushing it toward the complement, is pushing the orange toward the complement of yellow, which is purple. So there's a kind of jostling back and forth of these colors, kind of taking over each other's roles a little bit. They're kind of pushing each other. And that kind of complexity of what the colors are doing is totally the favorite part of what's going on. And I know that I'm not exaggerating, because I had first I did a study. I do these little studies with paint. And the first study looked very, very pretty. The orange was brighter. And it looked so pretty, but it looked so stupid, because it just looked like 4 shapes, because they weren't doing anything to each other. It looked like an ordinary 4 shapes. It didn't do anything. So that's kind of what I'm kind of trying to say. Is that like the color relationships are I try to get them to complicate and to do something and to have a dynamic relationship. And then, so like the fluid bridge painting that's across from the quote wall, it has a lot of that stuff going on, but it also has something else going on, that the complementary color, the color that would tend to balance or complete, one color, like the color that would complete the spectrum, is across the painting. I always try to put it across the painting so that there's kind of a reaching for that color. And so there's a lot of that, but there's also kind of, the picture is kind of stretching across, and there's that big curve, and then there are these, straighter lines and convex and concave, but there's a kind of stretching across and a kind of a reaching for those colors on the other side. And I feel like what I've gotten into in this show, in some of the paintings, is something like in music, like transposing to another key, trying to transpose to another color key. And so that happens there, and that's what that reaching is kind of about, is that, you're reaching to another key. And this painting has that going on too. You sort of start with this kind of warmer sand and yellow kind of warm kind of key, and then it transposes into a colder kind of color key. So I'm thinking about, I really feel that in relationship to listening to music, and kind of, there are a lot of musical relationships that I think we can make in color, and it's really a matter of having the sequence possible. If you figure out how to make a sequence happen, then you can have some of these things happen. And I'm just thinking about Harriet's paintings right now, because I think you have a lot of that. You know, sometimes I really admire the sequences in your color paintings. Yeah, Bennett.
So something that's been touched on, maybe coming at it, great composers like Beethoven, they have the power and many others to transform your safety. And at the same time, they talk about how writing and great jazz performance. And I know when I look at some of the paintings, I feel like I'm taking it to another dimension.
Oh, thanks.
Place. It's like you don't have to meditate. The question is, one, do you start out like with an intention to produce some kind of sturdy or and whether you do or you don't, how do you get it? Do you meditate? Do you like how do you get from here to there? Because I ran into these with prompts. I don't know what you said.
You know, I think just, the studio is such an incredible place. You know, you're there all the time, and I go in and, and you start working, and everything you do is just so not good, It's just, and you just keep at it, because you know from experience that if you keep at it and you keep, trying to be your best, and you're listening to great music, or whatever you're doing, in the course of your life, and just, eventually, sometimes I leave the studio after a week and it's still terrible. But then, I might come, I don't want to jinx anything, but, then you come in the next day and you're like, oh, obviously that has to go there, and that has to go there. And then, then it's like, right, it just kind of gets better. That's all. And so it's like learning, that learning to have the confidence that you're going to get there. But stuff. That's the thing. You learn stuff that, that these colors are not going to work, or this is not going to turn into something, or what's not going to work. And then there's hope, So I think it's more that. It's negative. Yeah. Yeah. Larry.
You mentioned music a couple times. Is there anything where you could point to specific music that influenced the piece, or do you just sort of work with the general vibe?
I listened, not to be corny, because everybody loves Bach, but, I listened to the Bach French suites, like, throughout this entire show. I have, like, a couple of I have Angela Hewitt, I have Glenn Gould, I have a couple of other people, I have like 4 recordings of the French suites, and then I'll listen to them on YouTube, so I'm obsessed.
So what is it about harmonies? What is it?
It's the sequences and the harmonies and the chords, from one chord to the next. Oh my God, the purity is unbelievable. And I think, I don't feel like I'm so pure, but the purity, it's out there, and it's just amazing to be able to access those harmonies sometimes. But there is something that I didn't say that I think is really, really key. So, are we okay with time?
Yeah, we're good. Yep, we've got like 5 minutes.
Okay, so the way that these actual paintings, this thing with the transparencies came about is I think it's kind of funny. I don't remember, Anna's here, she was around for this whole thing, but on 2 occasions, I did projects that had to do with sacred text, and one of them, I had this idea that I was going to, had been a new translation of Genesis and then the entire Torah by a great translator and scholar, Robert Alter. I don't know if people are, and I wanted to do my own translation of the 7 days, 6 days, or 7 days of creation based on light. So I had this idea that I was going to do the days, and I was going to just use colored plastic, and that was going to somehow make light, make the world, make the universe, so somehow. Anyway, it was not a well thought out project, and it didn't end up being very successful. But I spent pretty much a year cutting and gluing and taping pieces of transparent, lighting gels from, the gels for theatrical lighting. So I bought a lot of them, and my whole studio was these things, and I was cutting and pasting, and my studio floor was covered, my white studio floor was covered with pieces of cut plastic. And every couple of days, there would be 2 pieces of little plastic on top of each other that were mind-blowing. And they were so much better than everything I was spending all my time doing. So I would, after a while, just pick them up and tape them to the wall. And finally, this thing was done, and I was done with it. And I contacted Golden Artist Colors, and I sent them some of the lighting gels. I said, what could I use to paint like this? And they sent me a material, and I just started painting these 2 colors on top of each other. And then I tried to expand it so that it would be actually a picture. And that was around 2010. And then they started to get a little bit bigger. And then Christine and Martha came over, and they were like, okay. So that's really what happened, was that I started doing these paintings based on these pieces of junk on my floor. And it really was amazing. And I don't anticipate, like, sometimes it's just like little spots where it's just really beautiful with these overlaps. And I don't have any theory about it or why, or I don't know how to get to it. It's just sometimes really beautiful. So I'm really addicted to this stuff. And that's just how this all happened. Yeah. Yeah. Hi. Yeah.
I have a question about.
Oh, it's Savas. Hey. Hi.
It seems to me when I'm looking at these, there seems to be a lot more texture than use of palettes in your paintings.
It's a different material. Yeah, during the pandemic, I was unable to use the same material I'd been using before.
So, but I think it worked into a very nice way because it sort of interrupts a lot of it.
Interesting. Yeah. It's harder to use. This new material is more challenging.
And I think this is a testament to Jill.
Address edges more in these paintings because I notice edges a lot more in these paintings than I have in your others.
I don't know. I think so. I think maybe the edges, it's a little different. Yeah.
The shapes are different, certainly. Like, that's why I point to Fluid Bridge, because I feel like that shape is new.
That shape is really new. Yeah.
But I do want to say this is a testament to you, because your materials have changed. You make this seem very easy, I'm going to say. It's not easy, I know. But I know what you've gone through with your materials just in the past 11 years, the changes.
Yeah.
And it's been traumatic at times. And you have found a way to problem solve and solve this and make it work every time to your benefit. And you can see, if you really dissect Jill's work for the last 11 years, you could see the different variations in the texture or translucency or what have you. But every single time it's like there's a panic and then, oh my, look what you've done. It works out. So that's really, it's incredible what you do with your process and how you manage this.
Yeah, thanks. But I think that this, this sequence thing is I don't really know if I know what it is, but I just feel like, I mean, this is going to be, I'm just going to say this because I think it's interesting, and I don't know that it's like true or whatever, but when I went to the Rothko Works on Paper show in DC, it was so beautiful. Rothko's so great. But after a while, can't he get things moving more? So, he didn't need to. He did. He was unbelievable. He was such a great artist. But I do think I've got something about getting things moving, and yeah, so that's important to me.
Anybody got? Oh, we've got a few more. Yes.
As I look at this and listen to you, the word that comes to mind is dialogue.
Yeah, thanks.
You're in constant dialogue, and you said you work on one piece at a time.
Yeah.
And what's wonderful about this, I add the other word gentle. I mean, I know that it's not gentle in terms of the process, but the way it turns out when one looks at it, for me, it was a gentle dialogue. It was the whole evolution of this.
Yeah, thanks. Dialogue is, I try to, in a way, some of them in the past were really dialogic looking. Yeah, but that's definitely there. Yeah, I love that.
I'm trying to picture you in the studio, getting the right viscosity, getting everything,
Yeah.
then pouring. Are you lifting it high to get it to rush?
Yeah.
I see it as a dance. I see these works
Yeah.
as a dance. But I'm just imagining.
It's more slapstick.
Imagine, okay, so bring it down or bring it back
Right.
up and go some more. And just that kind of the movement of your body. And
I couldn't have done a couple of these without an assistant. Because the new material, I actually have to lift it up 180 degrees, and so then I'm standing behind it, and I can't see it, I can't do anything. So I absolutely needed to have an assistant. So it's actually, it's.
And so at one point you say, okay, bring it down now.
Yeah, bring it down, put it up, and then sometimes go like that. Yeah. Sometimes like lifting it and putting it, having it on a corner, and yeah.
You didn't get that corner yet, that's right.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of work.
I see dancing, especially this.
Oh,
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
You said you're working with like Roscoe theater gels, that kind of thing.
I don't use them anymore. That was at the beginning. Yeah.
And you said an overhead projector. So do you ever project the colors from the gels like onto a wall or something, or are you
No.
putting them flat on the floor?
No. I just use them as material. I never project them. Yeah. I just cut them and use them as, like a collage material. But I don't use the gels anymore. Now I make my own colors because those colors are so boring. They're so bright and they're so limited. So, like I have just like, just many versions of a tan or something, or many versions of a cold yellow or something like that. So I spent a lot of time and money creating these fake Roscoe, yeah. Those fake Roscoe gels. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You talked about the edges, which was Rocco masterpieces.
Yeah.
But I'm so fascinated with the yellow, which you also mentioned before, because as I'm sitting there and I'll glance from that to something else and come back, the edge of that one will make the darker yellow pop out and do all these wonderful vibrations going on of the color moving.
Yeah, and some of it really, some of that stuff with the overlaps, I don't really know. Some of it is accidental. It just comes out of the materials, and it's really amazing. I'll come in the next morning like, oh my gosh, that's so good. I had nothing to do with it. Surprises, yeah. And so the materials are very wonderful. And honestly, when I had trouble with these materials, I got to say the custom lab at Golden, I have like, I don't know, 10, 12, even more versions that I rejected. They really, really worked with me because it looked like linoleum. I mean, it was like nothing. It didn't do anything. And I needed it to have this kind of, incident. And they worked with me. They were awesome. Yeah. Sharon?
Also about the process. We were talking about how it doesn't go the right way. So do you just discard the whole painting, or do you start like you were talking about Nathanson before, how she'll paint over, and a lot of art is about mistakes. Like sometimes you said something will happen like surprise that you like it, but if the color's not exactly what you thought, or if it doesn't go,
It has to be pretty close. I mean, there are paintings where I've taken them in a different direction, and I have been able to do that. There was a period when I first started doing them where I was losing them so much. I mean, I don't know if I should tell this story, but I moved out of a studio And it was going to be our studio in Long Island City. And we moved out, and we could leave a lot of junk there because they were just going to trash everything. And I left a lot of junk when I moved out, and a painter came to visit a friend, and she was looking through all my stuff to see if there was anything, you know, maybe she could use this, or maybe there would be a panel she could use. And so she saw everything that I left there. I left so much stuff here, so many failed paintings. And I said, so what do you think? Do you think I should have brought any of that stuff? I really lost a lot of paintings when I first started doing this. And I feel like I learned my lesson, because I thought then, oh yeah, sure, you know, I'll be able to, no. Because I can't make, you know, if you can make one correction, okay, but I'm not able to make enough corrections. You know, I can't really paint over things. So it's better that I just try to stay close to.
Susan Bexley has a question.
Yeah.
How do you think about using acrylics versus oils in this correction process, which I understand also from experience is very difficult to correct and boring. And then also, you know, your paintings probably could work from many different orientations. Do you work, like the painting that we're looking at here, is that the orientation?
No, I painted it in the other orientation.
You did?
I did.
Sometimes you flip it.
I've totally flipped them, yeah. But, you know, I use oil paint for corrections. That I can do, you know. And to a certain extent, there's a correction, you know, some of all of that oil paint is, I needed the drawing to go that way. It was, you know, too pat. It needed to have a little pushback. So, yeah. How are we doing?
Anybody else? I think we're good. Everybody want to go have a glass of wine?
Thank you so much. I want to hear Anne, what's up?
Well, maybe this is a fitting close. I'm just so glad you mentioned that you listen to music and the purity of the music, because your paintings, that's a great description for your painting. Not just the color, but your intention is so focused and.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks. Well, it's out there. It's out there. I'm reaching for it. It's not coming from me. I'm reaching for it. It's out there.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Nice work. Nice work.